They said discipline wins wars, that obedience is the soul of an army, that survival belongs to the man who follows orders, not to the one who questions them. But sometimes history shifts in silence when a man, frozen and alone, decides not to obey. It happened on a winter morning in 1944, somewhere along the endless burning front between East and West. The maps called it Eastern Europe. The soldiers called it nowhere, a place where every tree had been shelled, every farmhouse burned, and every breath turned to fog. Snow fell in sheets, thick, wet, heavy. It muted the world, swallowing sound and mercy alike. And beneath that falling white, men crouched in blackened ruins, hands stiff on their rifles, eyes squinting through frost. Engines rumbled in the distance, deep, metallic, patient. It was not thunder. It was machinery. The heartbeat of a German Panzer column advancing through the mist. Among the Soviet defenders was a gunner named Petrov. He was not a hero. He was not decorated, not adored, not feared. He was simply consistent. He did his work with the quiet precision of a man who had long ago stopped believing in glory. The kind of soldier who never volunteered, never complained, the kind who survived by obeying. That morning his task was simple: operate the 76mm anti-tank gun positioned near a collapsed barn. It was one of the few weapons still functional after weeks of retreat. A single iron lung meant to hold back a mechanical storm. His crew numbered 3. An assistant loader, a spotter, and himself. They had slept little, eaten less. Their uniforms were patched with soot and frost, their faces hollow with exhaustion. But the gun still worked. That was all that mattered. The voice came through the crackling field radio, thin, strained, bureaucratic. Do not engage until they're within 300 meters. Conserve ammunition. Fire only on my signal. Static followed. Then silence. Petrov nodded. He didn't argue. He adjusted the breech, sighted the field, checked the fuse on each shell by touch. Every motion deliberate, almost ritual. And then the sound. Treads grinding against frozen mud. A deep vibration that crawled through the earth and into bone. It was a sound every Soviet soldier had learned to fear. The sound of steel approaching. Through the fog, shadows began to form. Black silhouettes of panzers, armored beasts, their hulls glistening with frost. Each moved with the same terrible grace, each gun turning as if guided by one mechanical will. Petrov's breath slowed. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 8. 8 tanks, a full spearhead moving in perfect formation. He waited for the order. None came. The loader whispered, "Wait." Command said. But Petrov wasn't listening to command anymore. He was listening to the rhythm. Each tank moved exactly 15 seconds apart. Each gunner fired in synchronized bursts. The Germans' discipline turned into a kind of music, mechanical and predictable. And in that music, Petrov heard something else, a flaw. He shifted his aim, not at the lead tank, where logic said to strike, but at the third, a small adjustment, a few degrees left, a fraction down. He exhaled and fired. The recoil threw his shoulder back. The sound cracked through the valley, and a heartbeat later, a bloom of fire. The 3rd Panzer lurched sideways, smoke erupting from its rear hatch. The column hesitated. A second shot, this time at the last tank. Metal screamed. The rear vehicle halted. Its treads split open. In seconds, the formation was broken. "Petrov," the loader shouted, "you'll get us killed." They said to wait, but Petrov had already reloaded. He no longer heard the man beside him. He no longer thought in words, only rhythm. The Germans tried to adjust, to reform, to restore their perfect mechanical dance. But Petrov didn't let them. He fired irregularly, 2 shots close together, then a long pause, then one more. Random, illogical, human. The panzers hesitated, unsure where the next impact would land. Their machine gunners fired wildly into smoke and snow. The calm, synchronized advance disintegrated into chaos. The Soviets, watching from nearby trenches, couldn't believe it. They had seen what a panzer column could do when it moved as one. Now they watched it stumble, as if one man with a single gun had thrown a wrench into an entire machine. The loader screamed, "We're out of armor-piercing rounds." Petrov's gloves were burned through from the heat of the barrel. He didn't stop. He aimed again, this time firing explosive shells at the ice beneath the tanks. Chunks of frozen mud erupted. Engines spun uselessly. Tracks lost traction. One tank slid sideways, colliding with another. Within minutes, what had been an unstoppable advance became a scrapyard of smoke and confusion. And then, silence. The gun's barrel glowed red. The snow hissed where it touched the metal. Petrov leaned against the shield, breath slow, eyes unfocused. In the distance, men were shouting. Soviet infantry rushing forward to counterattack. But for Petrov, it was over. He had broken the rhythm. Official reports later described it as effective artillery fire. No name, no story, just another line in another war. But the men who were there, the ones who saw an entire German column collapse under one man's defiance, they remembered. They said, he broke the rules and saved them all. War at its core is rhythm. Every army learns to move like an engine. Advance, fire, reload, repeat. Every soldier becomes a cog within that rhythm, a small, replaceable part of a vast, grinding design. The German army of 1944 had perfected this idea. Its divisions did not just move with precision. They were precision. Each tank, each soldier, each radio transmission was part of a synchronized mechanism, an orchestra of steel and logic. It was this machine that had conquered half of Europe. It was this rhythm that had ground nations into submission. And yet, on that nameless field, that perfect rhythm had failed, not to a superior force, but to an interruption, a single man who saw the pattern and refused to obey it. The German Panzer doctrine was the embodiment of order, a dance of armor and communication. The lead tank spotted, the second corrected, the third provided covering fire, the fourth advanced, every action rehearsed, every reaction timed. Even their destruction, when it came, had a kind of dignity, tanks burning in formation, never scattered. But Petrov had broken the tempo. He had fired not where logic dictated, but where intuition whispered, and intuition, that most human of errors, is the one thing no machine can calculate. For the men inside those tanks, the shock was not from the explosions, but from confusion. Their radios crackled with contradictory commands. Advance, retreat, hold position. Each order collided with another, until command itself became noise. And in war, noise is death. While the Germans struggled to understand what was happening, Petrov's gun pit was a world of its own. Smoke coiled around the gun like incense. Spent casings steamed in the snow. His loader, coughing and half deaf, fumbled with the last shell. Petrov's hands shook, not from fear, from exhaustion, from adrenaline. His ears rang so loudly he could barely hear the world beyond the weapon, but he kept firing. The assistant spotter, a boy barely 20, stared at him with something like awe. "Comrade," he said, "they're pulling back." Petrov said nothing. He didn't smile. He just exhaled long and slow, as if releasing years of obedience from his chest. When the smoke cleared, Soviet infantry moved forward. They advanced cautiously, stepping over twisted steel and burned armor. What they found defied understanding. Every third or fourth tank destroyed, others untouched, tracks frozen mid-turn, engines dead but unscarred. It looked random. It looked like luck. But luck does not move with rhythm. It was design, the design of disorder. Petrov's shots had struck not the strongest points, but the weakest moments where motion became prediction, where rhythm became habit. He hadn't fought tanks. He'd fought pattern. The German command later described the event in their after-action reports as anomalous fire. No explanation, no precedent. The perfect machine had stuttered. When word reached higher Soviet command, it caused unease rather than pride. Petrov's decision had violated orders, disrupted coordination, and risked exposure. He was neither reprimanded nor rewarded. He was simply reassigned, a quiet burial of brilliance under the bureaucracy of war. It was safer that way. Armies do not celebrate disobedience, even when it saves them. But among soldiers, the story spread like smoke. Men whispered it between shifts, in trenches and barracks, by the dim light of oil lamps. They said, one man stopped a column. One man fired when no one else dared. One man saw the rhythm and broke it. For centuries, armies had worshipped obedience. It was the foundation of control, the belief that a soldier's greatest virtue is silence. But the mechanized wars of the 20th century changed that equation. The more disciplined the system became, the more fragile it grew, because order is predictable, and predictability is death. Petrov's Defiance revealed something modern militaries would spend decades trying to understand, that no system, no doctrine, no algorithm can survive when faced with the irrational genius of instinct. It wasn't bravery that saved him that day. It was perception, the ability to see the machine not as an enemy, but as a pattern to be rewritten. He had done in chaos what designers of weapons and tacticians of war would one day formalize under names like asymmetry and disruption. He had anticipated the future without knowing it. That night, as the survivors gathered around small fires, Petrov sat apart. His gloves were burned through, his uniform scorched with black powder. Someone handed him a ration of vodka. He didn't drink it. A medic approached, checked his ears, his hands, his pulse. Lucky man, she said. He didn't answer. In his mind, the world still moved in mechanical rhythm, the echo of treads, the clatter of shells, the endless pulse of repetition. He had interrupted it once, but he knew it would return. It always did. War, like industry, thrives on repetition. The same commands, the same movements, the same errors passed down from one generation of soldiers to the next. Armies call it discipline, but to the men inside it, it feels more like gravity. Every great conflict builds its own rhythm, a pulse that drives men forward, even when reason says stop. It begins in training fields where recruits march to whistles. It grows in factories where machines hammer out the weapons they will one day carry. And it ends on the battlefield where that rhythm devours them all. In 1944, both armies on the Eastern Front had long since surrendered their humanity to rhythm. The Germans marched to procedure, the Soviets to necessity. Both believed they were fighting for survival. In truth, they were fighting to keep their machines alive. The Panzer was not just a vehicle, it was an ideology. Every nut, every weld, every angle of armor had been calculated to perfection. The German engineers who built it believed that precision was morality, that if something worked flawlessly, it was righteous. And for a time it was. Panzers rolled across Europe like clockwork made of steel. Their movements were not chaos, but choreography. Each division, a symphony of logistics and timing. But there was one flaw in the design, the same flaw that haunts every machine. It cannot improvise. When Petrov fired, he didn't just break tanks. He broke expectations. He introduced noise into a closed system. And no system survives noise. Inside those armored hulls, German gunners shouted in confusion. Their radios screamed overlapping orders. Tanks rotated their turrets in conflicting directions, unsure where the enemy was. The perfect system had lost its conductor. And when order disappears, even steel begins to hesitate. On the other side, the Soviet machine was no less relentless, but it was a different kind of rhythm. Rough, improvised, brutal. Where the Germans sought perfection, the Soviets sought endurance. They won not by outsmarting the machine, but by outlasting it. Their factories worked around the clock, 24 hours of heat, smoke, and metal. Every gun, every shell, every engine came at the cost of exhaustion and blood. Men like Petrov were forged in that rhythm. They did not think of victory or defeat, only continuation. To break rhythm, even for survival, was to step outside the system, to think as an individual. And in total war, individuality was dangerous. That was why Petrov's story mattered. Not because he was a hero, but because he remembered how to think. No camera recorded what happened on that morning. No general arrived to see the smoke curling over the field. There were no speeches, no medals, no songs. When the fighting ended, the world simply moved on, as it always does. The war swallowed the story whole. But in the quiet after the gunfire, the survivors saw something they would never forget, the wreckage of precision. Tanks frozen mid-turn, machine guns bent into the snow, tracks twisted like the bones of some extinct creature. The field was not a battlefield. It was an autopsy of a machine. And in its silence, the men realized how fragile perfection truly was. Historians later called that winter the season of collapse. The German army was retreating on all fronts. Its precision, its myth of invincibility, had begun to fracture under the weight of endless motion. Factories in Berlin still produced tanks, but they arrived at the front without fuel, without ammunition, without men to drive them. The system that once built empires now built ghosts. Petrov, transferred to another regiment, never saw the field again. He fought through Poland, through the Vistula, through the endless churn of retreat and advance. Each day felt the same: wake, march, dig, fire, repeat, until even victory began to feel like routine. The Second World War was more than a struggle of nations. It was a struggle between man and his own creations, between instinct and design, between rhythm and rupture. Every weapon, every plane, every tank was a reflection of its maker's philosophy. The Americans built abundance. The Germans built precision. The Soviets built endurance. And yet all three discovered the same truth. Machines win battles, but men decide wars. Petrov's Defiance had not changed history on its own, but it revealed a truth history often hides, that progress, whether in war or in peace, belongs not to those who follow, but to those who see differently. When the war ended, the world wrote its history in neat lines. Battles had names, victories had numbers, heroes had medals, but the truth, the living human truth, rarely fits into the precision of record books. It exists in the quiet defiance of individuals, in the moments where instinct overrules instruction, moments that vanish from reports but echo through generations. Petrov's moment was one of them. A single decision made in seconds, to fire when ordered not to act when the system demanded silence. And like most acts of true innovation, it was punished by history's indifference. After the war, analysts studied every engagement, every column, every casualty ratio. They searched for patterns that could explain why one side survived where another failed. They never found Petrov's name, but in dusty reports, in phrases like localized resistance, unsanctioned artillery response, and enemy advance disrupted by irregular fire, you can still find traces of him, fingerprints of disobedience hidden beneath the language of obedience. War, like industry, demands predictability. It fears improvisation, because improvisation cannot be replicated or quantified or controlled. And yet every leap forward, in battle, in science, in art, begins with someone ignoring a rule. The general spoke of tactics and doctrine. The engineer spoke of systems and models. But Petrov's story whispered something more dangerous, that a man armed only with awareness can outthink the machinery built to control him. What makes someone disobey an order in war? Not arrogance, not rebellion, but clarity. Petrov's decision was not emotion. It was logic seen from a different angle. Logic that refused to fit the machine. When the column appeared through the fog, he didn't see tanks. He saw rhythm. He saw the math of motion, the pulse of procedure. He saw that to win, he didn't need to destroy the enemy's strength. He only needed to destroy its certainty. He saw the flaw every perfect system hides, that repetition breeds blindness. And with that single act, he transformed chaos into strategy, long before anyone had a name for it. In later decades, military theorists would give new names to what Petrov did that morning. They would call it disruption tactics, unpredictability algorithms, combat pattern interference. They would reduce instinct to equations. They would teach young officers how to simulate disorder. They would model chaos on computer screens. But none of it would carry the same heat, the same human terror, as one man defying a machine in real time. Because theory can imitate instinct, but it can never feel it. And feeling, raw, uncalculated awareness is what separates a human from the mechanism he creates. In peace, we praise those who follow rules. In war, we survive because someone breaks them. The paradox of civilization is that its progress depends on the few who refuse to behave. Every invention, every revolution, every act of creation begins as a disobedience, a refusal to accept that things must remain as they are. Factories, machines, armies, they are built to maintain rhythm, but progress is built by those who interrupt it. That is the hidden symmetry between Petrov's battlefield and the factory floor of Detroit, between the soldier who defied his orders and the engineer who reimagined the assembly line. Both broke the pattern. Both faced the same punishment. Silence. Years after the war, the field where Petrov fought returned to quiet. Grass grew over the wrecks. The wind carried nothing but the faint sound of rust. Farmers plowed the soil where steel once burned. Children played among the overgrown trenches, unaware of what had happened there. The machine was gone, but its ghost remained. And beneath that quiet earth lay an unspoken truth that even the most powerful systems depend in the end on fragile human judgment. That progress, whether in war or peace, cannot exist without risk, because to innovate is to disobey, and to disobey is to be human. Today, war has changed its shape. Tanks have given way to drones, radios to satellites, orders to algorithms. The modern battlefield hums not with engines, but with data. Endless signals flowing through invisible networks. Commanders now fight wars through screens, their soldiers guided by coordinates instead of courage. And yet the danger is the same, because when everything becomes predictable, one spark of disobedience can still rewrite the outcome. The next Petrov may not pull a trigger. He may type a line of code. He may disable a targeting algorithm or question a command no one else dares to. And once again, history will call it anomaly. But it will be something far older, instinct against mechanism. The further we move from that frozen battlefield, the more abstract war becomes. The roar of tanks has turned into the whisper of drones. The smell of oil and cordite has been replaced by the sterile hum of servers. And yet, for all our progress, the same paradox endures. Machines may execute war, but only men can decide it. The more perfect our systems grow, the more fragile they become, because perfection has no room for improvisation. And history, cruel as it is, always rewards the improvised. Petrov's act was not just military defiance. It was a reminder that intuition is the last weapon machines will never master. In every age, humanity builds systems to protect itself from uncertainty. We call them doctrines, procedures, algorithms. We trust them because they promise predictability, a way to tame chaos, to make the unknowable measurable. The Germans believed their system of war was infallible. The Soviets believed their system of obedience was eternal. Both discovered the same truth: systems cannot see, only people can. When Petrov fired against his orders, he wasn't rejecting discipline. He was reclaiming awareness, the one thing no hierarchy can manufacture. The world remembers great inventions, great machines, great victories. But the real milestones of progress come from something quieter, a single human mind refusing to surrender to the comfort of predictability. There are no monuments to Petrov, no medals engraved with his name, no parades, no anniversaries. But in a way, that anonymity is the highest honor a soldier like him could receive. Because the legacy of defiance is not meant to be worshipped, it is meant to be repeated. Every generation inherits its own kind of battlefield. For some it is steel and fire, for others it is code and data. For all it is the struggle between instinct and order. And somewhere in every age there will always be a Petrov, someone who listens not to commands but to rhythm, who looks at the perfect machine and whispers, "No." When we speak of machines, we often speak of progress. We forget that machines also reflect our fears, our fear of chaos, of inefficiency, of human error. But Petrov's defiance was human error weaponized, error transformed into understanding. He turned unpredictability into advantage, and in doing so proved that the mind is the only engine capable of true evolution. The Germans had built tanks that could outlast any storm. The Soviets had built men who could outlast any machine. Between them stood one man who understood both, the logic of steel and the logic of the soul. Every factory, every army, every digital network eventually faces the same question: what happens when the system becomes too perfect to fail and too blind to change? Perfection is not progress. It is paralysis, a cage made of logic. Petrov's defiance in its simplicity was liberation. He did not destroy an army. He destroyed the illusion of inevitability. He reminded the world that progress does not come from repeating success, but from challenging it. In that sense, he was not just a gunner. He was a philosopher of motion. His battlefield was not the snow-covered field before him, but the invisible border between obedience and thought. Today, when modern tanks roll across new frontiers, they carry sensors, processors, algorithms, layers of intelligence designed to make them infallible. But somewhere in that code lies a ghost, the echo of Petrov's decision. Because every time a commander hesitates, every time a drone operator questions an order, every time a system pauses before executing its perfect logic, it is that same ancient hesitation, that whisper of defiance returning. Progress remembers. Machines remember. Not through conscience, but through failure, through the brief, blinding moments when the human mind interrupts the machine and says, "I see something you do not." The story of Petrov is not just a footnote of war. It is the story of progress itself, the endless duel between rhythm and rebellion, between structure and spark. Every leap forward, every innovation, every revolution begins with someone willing to aim where no one else dares, to fire before the signal, to see not what is, but what could be. That morning in 1944, amid the snow and smoke, a single man broke formation, and in doing so, he revealed the fragile heart of every great machine. It functions perfectly only until a human being chooses to be imperfect, and in that imperfection, something greater is forged. They said he was reckless. They said he was lucky. They said he broke the rules. Maybe he did. But the world he helped shape was built by those very same rule breakers, men who dared to defy the rhythm that demanded their silence, because progress was never born from obedience. It was built from the sparks that flew when obedience finally shattered.